We are eating 220 pounds of meat per person every single year on average again, but the quality of the meat that we are eating is so much different than it was in the 1800s. Now it's been fried. Now the animals are raised differently. The animals are unhealthy. They're given antibiotics, vaccines. They're given GMO feed. They're not eating their natural diet. They're raised in terrible, filthy conditions. The quality of meat and how we're eating that meat has changed drastically.
Is it all right to eat a little meat? Probably. People in blue zones, longest lived populations in the history of the world, have eaten a little bit of meat, but only about once or twice a week, on average 5 times a month.
We're going to talk about this.
We in America eat about 220 pounds of meat a year. That would fill a bathtub. That is just too much.
220 pounds of meat per person a year might sound like a lot, but that is not too much at all. There was data that was released by the USDA and NHANES Research that went back and looked at meat consumption of humans from the year 1800 all the way up to present day. And what they found is that humans were eating about 220 to 225 pounds of meat, total meat intake per person each year. Now, this is mostly coming from red meat because poultry and chicken wasn't much of a thing then. You can look at this chart. There wasn't much poultry or chicken or turkey being eaten. That started to rise only maybe within the past 70 to 80 years when red meat has become vilified. That's when chicken started to rise. Now, over time, until about 1920s, you can see that total meat intake slowly and steadily decreased. As an individual, we were eating less and less meat, total meat intake. That dropped down to about 120 pounds per person. It almost cut in half. We dropped our meat consumption down 100 pounds per person every single year. Isn't it odd to note, though, heart disease was virtually rare in 1800. There was no reports. Even Dr. William Osler, one of the founders of Johns Hopkins University, found no cases of heart disease in his entire work in the 1870s and 1880s. Now, heart disease really only began to become prevalent in the 1900s, in the 20th century. And by 1921, it became the leading killer in Americans. And this is a weird association. The less and less meat that we ate, according to this chart, the more heart disease continued to rise. Probably because we were replacing it with refined sugars, added seed oils, an unsedentary culture, higher stress. If meat were the cause, if meat were the culprit, which it's never been shown to be causal of poor health outcomes, chronic modern day diseases, cancer, stroke, heart disease, metabolic disorders, then wouldn't we see the inverse relationship? Wouldn't we see a rise in meat consumption associated with a rise in chronic diseases? But this is showing the opposite. We ate less meat, but now heart disease is the #1 killer in Americans. Now, he said that we're back up to eating 220 pounds of meat per person every single year on average.
We in America eat about 220 pounds of meat a year.
Because at some point around the 1920s to 1930s, after, the Great Depression, we did begin eating more meat again, and that slowly and steadily climbed. But as you can see, red meat intake stayed about the same. We're still eating about the same amount of red meat that we were maybe 100 years ago. But what has drastically climbed is the amount of chicken, poultry consumption. And isn't chicken seen as a heart-healthy food because it's not a red meat? This is a white meat, which many people believe to be heart-healthy. But that chicken isn't just grilled chicken, isn't just baked chicken. That is coming from, a majority of the time, it's coming from fast food drive-thrus where the chicken has been deep fried in seed oils. This chicken, we are eating 220 pounds of meat per person every single year on average again, but the quality of the meat that we are eating is so much different than it was in the 1800s. In the 1800s, we were eating mostly unprocessed red meat that was free of seed oils, that was not fried, that wasn't coming along with a host of sugar and other unhealthy lifestyle factors. But that meat that we were eating 220 pounds of meat per person in the 1800s. Now we're eating the same amount, but the quality, it's done a 180. Now it's been fried. Now the animals are raised differently. The animals are unhealthy. They're given antibiotics, vaccines. They're given GMO feed. They're not eating their natural diet. They're raised in terrible, filthy conditions. The quality of meat and how we're eating that meat has changed drastically. So we could say it's not the cow that's the problem. It's the how. It's not the meat. It's how we have changed how we're eating the meat.
It's associated with higher rates of cardiovascular disease, higher rates of type 2 diabetes, higher rates of cancers of the GI tract, of prostate cancer, of breast cancer. It's poison in large quantities. A little bit's all right. We don't know the healthy level, but too much is bad.
He went on saying that red meat is associated with all these poor health outcomes. And as we've just explained, it's because of what we're doing in society. It's all these other unhealthy lifestyle factors that go along with our meat consumption. The way that we've consumed our meat has changed. The quality of the meat that we consume has changed. We're smoking, we're eating ultra processed foods, we're eating high amounts of processed sugar like high fructose corn syrup, seed oils, refined grains. We're living high stress lives. We're doing all these other unhealthy lifestyle factors. And this is the culprit for modern day lifestyle diseases, not red meat that we've eaten for nearly all of our human history. But then he goes on to say that people in blue zones only eat meat about 5 times a month, and that is one of the keys for their longevity. But he's purposely leaving out all these other cultures that I'm about to talk about that eat meat in plenty, that have eaten meat, that have had high lifespans, that have had long health spans, that live well into their hundreds, centenarians, as I'm about to talk about, that eat meat-heavy diets. It's what all these cultures don't do and what they have in common. Cultures that live well into their 80s, 90s, and even centenarians that live into their hundreds all have the same things in common. They move their bodies more, they don't stress often, they rarely smoke if ever, they have a sense of purpose, and their community. That's one of the biggest things, is having a sense of purpose and having community. These are all things that older aged individuals have in common. So if you like this content, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button below. We have a lot of incredible content coming your way very soon. Be sure to send this video out with somebody that you know needs to hear it most, and I'll talk to you next time.